So a year ago, something spectacular happened. That was the hijacking of a merchant navy vessel, MV Ruan. It was a Malta flagged vessel, if I remember right, owned by a Bulgarian company. And the Somalian pirates hijacked it. There were about 17 hostages, and Indian Navy sent a ship. They took the merchant vessel to somewhere in Portland, somewhere off Somalia, and we sent a ship. We boarded the ship, and we captured all the hijackers, freed all the prisoners, and for the first time in history, if my memory serves me right, they were brought to India and they were tried in the Indian court. And that decision for that surgical strike was taken by Admiral Harikumar, who's our proud guest this morning. So it was something like a scene straight from the Tom Hanks movie Captain Phillips, I should say. So my first question, sir, when you took the decision to board a ship, and it was like an act of war, right? So it could have had diplomatic complications. So what gave you the go ahead? What was that power in you? Than the Admiral Chief, there is a decision maker in you.
This is a lit fest, and I'm no author. So I was wondering whether I'll be a misfit in this place. But since the topic is about the seas and the oceans and the change that is continuously happening, so I thought I'll come and contribute my experience. And the oceans is something that very few of us know about. Okay, I'm sure in this room there'll be hardly anybody who spent 24 hours at sea, on board a boat or a ship or something like that. There hardly anyone will be there. We live on land, so therefore our experiences on land, and we know we are more familiar with it and so on. But the seas have a very, very important role to play in human existence. There is something called the 66, 70, 80, 90, 99 rule. What does it mean? It says that about 66% of our wealth comes from in and around the oceans, the seas. 70% of the globe is water, just like the human body. The human body is 70% water. 80% of the people live in coastal areas. 90% of trade flows through the oceans, comes through the oceans, through the oceanic route. And 99% of the internet traffic, all our data passes below the sea through undersea cables. So that's the importance of the ocean. And we are not aware of how much important it is in our everyday life. Simple act of piracy, which happens off the coast of Somalia, how does it impact each one of us sitting here? When they hijack a tanker or a cargo vessel, the first thing that happens is the insurance rates go up. Now, who's going to pay the additional cost? You and me, the consumer. So you'll find that the cost of petrol, diesel, cooking gas, everything goes up. Similarly, whatever we export, whether it's grain, everything, the insurance rates is the first thing that gets affected. Second, what happens? The Indian Ocean has got various choke points, like Bab el Mandeb, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, Malacca, so many places. Moment there is a disturbance in any of these places, then the normal traffic gets disrupted. If you remember, in 2023, there was news of a ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, this disrupted the flow of traffic and goods and through the Suez Canal. So, what is the option? Now, the ship which has to, come or go to our shores has to go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, around Africa and come. So anything that is brought or anything that is exported from our country, you can add about 12, 13 days of passage more. So what does it translate into? It translates into cost, higher cost of transportation. So therefore, it is very important for us to ensure that the seas are free, open, safe and secure so that we are able to use it for the benefit of our people, for the benefit of our economy and so on. We are dependent on getting the crude oil and natural gas from various Gulf countries. So how does it come? It comes through the sea. So if there is any disruption in the traffic, then obviously it will lead to shortages, lead to higher cost and so on. So what is the role of the Navy? Alfred Thayer Mahan, who wrote the book The Influence of Sea Power Upon History in the early 19th century, he said that the necessity for a navy, in the restricted sense of the word, springs from the need for peaceful shipping and ceases with it. That means when you have merchant ships, when you want to protect your trade, then you require a navy. You don't have great trade, you don't have imports, exports happening, then probably you don't require a navy. So that's why if you see all the countries that have prospered, over the last few centuries, they've all been maritime nations. First we saw, Pax Britannica, how a small country like the UK prospered. Then came the US, they had a very strong navy and, promoted the trade and so on. And then now we see China with a strong navy, and probably it's the time for India to have, a strong navy as well as, promote our trade, because trade actually flows through the oceans. The economics of it actually works in favor because, for the same amount of energy, you can transport 250 kgs by road, 2,500 kgs by rail, and 25,000 kgs by sea. That means it is 1:10:100. That is the type of economies of scale that you achieve. Plus bulk goods, huge goods. There is no other way that you can transport it. So more than 90% of our trade by volume and about 70% by value comes through the sea. And even when you say by value, 70% through the sea, what happens to the balance 30%? Or the balance 30%, more than half of that is actually services. And what services we do offer, like software, like BPOs, etc. How do they transact the business? It is through the internet. And the internet cables, the data flows under the sea. So in a sense, a very, very major part of our economy actually, requires the seas to be safe and secure. So that's why we had to respond to acts of piracy. In fact, India is one of the few countries which has enacted an Anti-Piracy Act in 2022 by the Act of Parliament, and that has helped us to now board the vessel and act firmly with resolve, where many other navies did not respond. They were all in the vicinity, but nobody wanted to take an action. But we said, this is our waters. This is where, we need to show that we will ensure that the Indian Ocean is kept safe, secure, and free and open for everyone to use.
I deliberately started with that one chapter in maritime history because not many people would have read like the way they would have read about the surgical strike. Because there's so many headlines about the surgical strike. MV Ruan's being freed was not much reported in the media, including us. So that's why I started with that. And I didn't interrupt because, the economics you explained, it makes sense to the common man. So my next question is our Navy, we have about 2,500 kilometer coastline. So is our Navy, has it grown in proportion to the Chinese threat or the other navies in the vicinity?
So firstly, when we develop a navy, you cannot buy a navy, you have to build a navy. So that's why, from the time of our independence, we have decided that we will move into becoming a builder's navy. So we started with building a very small patrol vessel called Ajay. And since then, we have built bigger and bigger ships progressively. And you're all aware of Cochin Shipyard, which has built the Vikrant, which is the largest, ship we have, the aircraft carrier. And we have been building destroyers, stealth frigates, and so on. As of today, we are about 130 plus, ships and submarines is the size of the force. In about 10, 12 years time, probably we'll be about 170 ships and submarines, plus there are about 60 ships on order, out of which only one is being built in Russia. Rest everything is being built in India. So, when the Navy has given a commitment to the nation that we will be a Atmanirbhar Navy by 2047, and that means and everything will be made here, and it'll be built in India, built for India, and maybe where applicable, built for the world.
When we say we build a ship, it also means that there is so much of ancillary industries that prop up. For example, not many would know that about 10,000 kilometers of cable run through an aircraft carrier, if I'm right. So that is made by them. So how do you think it has helped in developing smaller industries along the shipyards?
So, this was actually brought out in the economic survey report of 2023, where it is said that shipbuilding is a very important industry. We had a lot of merchant ships earlier, but over time it had dwindled to a very, very minuscule level, I would say, when you compare with the size of our country and the size of our economy and so on. So, just to tell you, in shipbuilding, there is something called a multiplier effect. So, if the Navy, for example, has got about 1,50,000 crores worth of shipbuilding orders, then the multiplier effect is about 1.8 times. That means, it generates revenue circulation of almost 2 lakh 75 thousand crores,
Close to 3 lakh crores. Yes.
So that is how it stimulates the economy, by shipbuilding in India. And this has been recognized by the government. And if you see in the current budget, there is about 25,000 crores have been allocated for as a maritime development fund. So the importance of having our own ocean-going vessels, the infrastructure for building these vessels, and all associated infrastructure along with it, like good modern ports, the connectivity to the ports, all that. So all this forms the ecosystem for the country to progress, have a very strong economy, and do well.
Admiral Harikumar's career, one of the hallmark, I would say, which is the induction of women officers in combat role. Earlier, as you know, the women Navy personnel were not allowed on board ships. So it was the Admiral who took the decision and ensured that people gave him a timeline of 5 years to making the ship ready for hosting or taking women officers. But he insisted on a shorter deadline. And that's why he acknowledged the power, maybe Mrs. Kala Nair is here, the power of women in nation building. So can you tell us how difficult it was to ensure giving a combat role to women officers in Navy, or how easy was it?
See, I have always believed that the women form 50% of the population, and they need to be represented. And there have always been arguments, as to why they should not be in combat roles, etc. But I firmly believe that there is nothing which stops a person from participating in the combat role. And I find even what remains very stark in my mind is a scene which I had seen many years back in my childhood. I saw a person, a family tilling a field, and the till is being pulled by the woman, and the man is standing with his leg on the whole part of it. So it shows, that they are equally strong and tough, and they can contribute. So there's no reason why they have to be denied. So there have always been challenges of accommodation, privacy requirements, and all that.
Has it do with our mindset, or is it a
I think
natural
largely it's a
concern?
mindset. We can always find solutions if required. So that's why we took against a lot of opposition. We had decided finally to implement it. So once the decision is taken to implement, then everything sort of falls in place.
How was the
Today-
government support to it? How was the government support to it?
There was total support from the government. The opposition was largely within the service. Various people have their own opinions, and they try to tell you why it is not a good idea, and so on. So there are requirements like gender sensitization and etc. that needs to be brought in. Also, you remember that on a ship or a submarine, it's a very closed space, and you have to work in very close proximity, and there is always the risk of fire, flooding, and so on. So whether it's a male or a female, they have to be competent to to deal with the situations that may arise. So we insisted only on ensuring that they're physically fit, competent, and capable of discharging their duty. So that's all. We are looking at being a completely gender neutral force, and we had our first commanding officer of a naval vessel, Commander Prerna Devasthali. She got appointed last year. I'm sure her tenure is going on well. And maybe 30 years later, you may have a woman Navy chief,
Navy chief.
sitting and discussing with you.
It has gone a long way in inspiring young women to join Navy. So, are there any concessions given to them, or do they go through the same drill as their male colleagues do?
Absolutely, everything is the same. There is no leeway, except certain types of physical tests. Probably we give alternate ones for that, because why I'm saying they need to be as tough and as strong, because see, on a ship, for example, a hatch or a door, we call something which closes horizontally is called a hatch. Now, if there is a sudden flooding and water is coming up, you need to have the strength to close that hatch, which is probably heavy, 25, 30
Yeah.
kgs, like that. So we have to ensure that they are strong enough and able to,
Quick to respond
meet the
to-
challenge and as part of the team.
And Admiral, during your career, I'm not saying as the Chief of Naval Staff, you took this bold decision to open up a new strategic base in Lakshadweep. Lakshadweep was known as a peaceful island, and so a lot of people had raised the eyebrows. Why should Navy go there? Why should we have a base in Lakshadweep? Bring weapons to a peaceful, necklace of islands, so to speak. So, what prompted you? Why, or what prompted the nation, the government, to have a strong base in Lakshadweep?
No, it is not that we set up suddenly. We have been having a presence in the islands, in the Lakshadweep for a long time. We have had small units there.
And also must
It's
add
just
that their day-to-day life, medical evacuation, every emergency Navy responded to the Lakshadweep Island.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you were there always. Okay.
Yeah. So we have had a presence in the Lakshadweep for a long time, but it's just that we felt that when you commission a unit, then firstly it sends a message. Secondly, it's a more administratively and operationally capable. So that's why the decision was taken. We had commissioned INS Jatayu there. What do we gain by having a unit like that in the Lakshadweep? Firstly, it's a little out from the mainland, and it's one of the southernmost, closer to the southernmost islands in the Laccadives. Uh, what did Jadayu do? In mythologically, Jadayu was the first responder actually, to Lord Ram, because he was there, he saw something and he told him. So we wanted to, create Jatayu there so that, we come to know maritime domain awareness, inputs can come from, that unit which is there, it will have radar, all those things. So plus we can have weapons, based there, maybe BrahMos can be positioned there, which will enhance the, capability.
BrahMos is now totally
No, as of
indigenous.
now, yeah, it's an indigenous system, and we have, like I said, we have decided that we will become an Atmanirbhar Navy. So we had earlier we had missiles and weapons from the which we bought from
Israel, we
various
used to
countries.
import from Israel.
But today, we are very happy that many of our weapons, like BrahMos, which is a surface-to-surface missile, we have the surface-to-air missiles, we have the Varunastra torpedoes. Now, naval anti-ship missile is under trial. So, a lot of indigenous development is happening.
I think the development of the nuclear submarine would have been a bigger challenge than developing missiles.
Yeah, it is. But that's a technology, we have been progressing. So we are looking at, nuclear attack submarines because of the vastness of the ocean. There has always been the debate as to should you have nuclear submarines or should you have a third aircraft carrier, etc. But my point is that why should you worry whether should you have 3 aircraft carriers, 4 aircraft carriers, etc. When you talk of a cricket team, for example, can you only have a batsman? You need to have bowlers. You need to have different types of bowlers, pace bowlers, spinners, fast bowlers, etc. Same is the case with the Navy. It has to be a all-round capable force. You have to have, you have to have the ability to deal with the different types of threats which are there. So you need submarines, you need aircraft carriers, because at sea, only an aircraft carrier, when you're deep into the ocean, can provide you protection, defense against aircraft. You may have surface-to-air missiles, but when you are threatened by aircraft from other aircraft carriers, then the only way you can have constant air defense is by having your own aircraft carrier in the fleet.
And what would be an ideal proportion? How many submarines, how many aircraft for a country like India?
It's very difficult to quantify, I would say. It depends. And I would also like to say that, when you look at force development or capability development, you're not looking at purely on threats. You're developing your force based upon the interests. Okay? I want you to share this quote by Lord Henry Temple Palmerston, who said that, this is what he said in the House of Commons in 1848. We do not have eternal allies, we do not have perpetual enemies, but our interests are both eternal and perpetual, and therefore it is our duty to follow those interests. So same is, therefore, as a nation, we need to pursue our interests. So we have our national interest in the maritime domain, which is what the Navy is meant to protect, preserve, promote, and pursue.
So that takes me to the next question, natural question. You are in a very unenviable position of having most unfriendly neighbors all over. You have Sri Lanka with a lot of interest in China. You have China, and both the West and East have naval interest as well as, they disturb the country. So how was life as a Navy chief with so many of unfriendly neighbors all around?
That's what I'm paid for, to ensure that there is peace and tranquility in the ocean. So our policy has been articulated by the Honorable Prime Minister, where he talked of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. So how do you ensure, security as well as growth? He had said very clearly that, Bharat does not wish to grow on its own alone. We want to take everybody along in our region. And the five S's that we say, that is Samman, that is treat everybody with respect. Samvad, have dialogue. Then ensure there is peace or Shanti. And Samriddhi, that is, prosperity will follow. So we ensure that we engage with our neighbors, try and, because there is, even the smaller countries have a lot to offer in ensuring maritime domain awareness, in ensuring that the oceans are kept safe and so on. We find the presence of Chinese vessels here. But China, like any other country, has got legitimate interests. It's got trade, it's got its own interests. So long as it doesn't infringe on our interests, it's okay. So we as a Navy keep watch on the happenings. When their vessels are operating here, we keep an eye on it. That's what maritime domain awareness is all about. Sometimes their research vessels operate in or in close to our areas of interest. So we keep very close.
So it's something like a Galvan, like pushing to that side that happened between the armies of the two nations.
Absolutely.
So you have that every day, is it?
So we also, monitor very, very closely, and we have our assets there, both air as well as surface, and sometimes underwater as well. So that's how we keep track of it.
So, looking for a ship or a submarine in such vast waters is like the proverbial needle in the haystack. So, is our technology up to date to do that? Do you have satellite support?
Yeah. See, along the coast we have the coastal radar chain. Then we have the maritime patrol aircraft, which of the Dornier type of aircraft, which have got we call them medium range. They operate close, little out to the sea coast. And thereafter we use the RPAs, like the and the Boeings, which we have. P8Is.
P30, P5s.
P8Is.
P8.
P8. P8Is.
AVAX type plane.
Not AVAX. They are
those ones we
version.
procured from US.
Long range maritime patrol
Yes,
aircraft,
yes.
LRMPs we call them. So they do that. Then we have the HALE, UAVs. So we try to visit those areas of interest as frequently as possible to ensure that we know who's operating there and what they are up to. So this is all this data thereafter is collated in the IFC-IO, or it's called the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region, and we share it as required with our countries of interest.
One question is that when we say that we are trying to reach out to the littoral nations, and that they don't have so much of interest in development of India, but still we have gone ahead and started giving training to Navy trainees from Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Myanmar, etc. So how does that work? These guys are going to come back and fight us one day in future, maybe, but you are going to train them here. Isn't there a contradiction there?
No, they are actually all friendly countries.
As of now.
We have been training more than, I think more than 5,000, 6,000 personnel have been trained over the last about 10 years or so. And they're mostly from all friendly countries. You have from Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, Mauritius, Seychelles, Kenya, and a whole lot of countries they come. So how does it help? Firstly, these are small, it helps in capability development. They are able to operate their own vessels, etc. We give a helping hand. We in operation, maintenance, etc., spare support, and so on. And at the same time, we also help them in capacity building. So if, for example, in our area, if they are able to look after their areas of interest or their waters, and share the information if there is a requirement. I'll tell you how it works. For example, in 2022, there was a incident of kidnapping of a Seychelles fishing boat along with its crew, and they were being held hostage by the drug dealer, traffickers. So I got information from the Seychelles CDS. He called up to say this has happened. Can you help? So straight away we launched our P8I aircraft. We deployed ships, and I'm glad to say we could rescue along with the Sri Lankan Navy. We could effect a rescue of that person. So this is how it works. These problems that we face at sea, like drug trafficking, kidnapping, piracy, then terrorism, weapons,
Illegal
all
fishing,
this.
everything.
I call them, problems without passport. Means they don't ask permission from any country to, transit from one area to another. So they just come and, create chaos. So therefore, collectively, you have to develop something called the collective maritime competence so that you are able to deal with all these challenges.
I may be wrong here, but did that standoff with Iran happen during your time when some retired naval officers were held in their jails for alleged
This was an issue in Qatar.
Qatar, yes.
Yeah. So,
We took help from Iran to solve it.
no, I think it was our national leadership who,
Decided.
who worked on it to ensure that.
So can you tell us something about it? Because there are some Malayali officers also involved then. So how did the negotiations go? Because the whole nation was on tense moments because
Yeah,
our officers.
we were. I was personally, involved and concerned because they were ex-naval personnel, and they were in a different country, and
Charges of espionage.
and it was a challenging time for us. We did extend support to the families, and then the national leadership, worked on the issue to ensure that the issue gets addressed, and we are very happy that it turned out the way it is. So I think it's full credit to the national leadership, all the concerned, because the Navy per se does not have anything much to do because it is not our charter. So it is the Ministry of External Affairs, then the National Security Advisor, the PMO, Prime Minister, the
After
national
that, have you issued any advisory to the personnel that what to do, not to do?
Yeah, we do that. We do that, and in this case, it was largely, I would say, misunderstanding and maybe a little bit of overzealousness, etc. But there was really not much, you know, role for the Navy in this, and a lot of it was misunderstanding as well.
Tell us something about your childhood days from Trivandrum and then going to be the commander of an aircraft carrier and then the Navy chief. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think it was by accident. I joined the Navy. I was a good student. I studied in Manda Memorial Residential High School. I got good marks in the SSLC. Then I studied in Arts College, first year pre-degree. And someone told me, why don't you just appear for the India exam? So I just gave the exam, cleared the exam. Then they said, go for the interview. It's very good. The SSB interview is a challenge, but it helps you, develop. So I went for the interview, cleared the interview. There was a little bit of temporary medical unfitness. And still, actually, my parents were not very keen on my joining the armed forces. I was all set actually to go to Trivandrum Engineering College, become an engineer and then pursue some career like that. And then when the merit list came out, I was in the first 10, I think ranked 7 or something in all India. So then that sort of changed that, it was the tipping point, I would say. And I took a call to join. It was against the wishes of my parents at that point of time. But then, that was probably fate or destiny or whatever. And I have no regrets. It's been a great experience. And for any of the youth presently, I don't see too many youth here. I think it's a great service. Any military service, I would think it's a great service. Uh, it takes much from you, but gives you much more, and it's very demanding. But it the what you gain is, especially the intangible one part of it, is something like uh, leadership, uh, discipline, punctuality, uh, teamwork, cohesion, dignity of labor. I mean, you don't have to, when you join the military at any, respective of whether you rise to the level of chief, etc., that doesn't matter.
But I must add here one point, because you know what, the statistics say that just 0.8%, not even 1%
yeah.
of officers make it to the 2-star and above in Navy. So the competition is so tough, the climb is so hard. So after all that, reaching there is like really a proud moment for all of us.
Yeah, see, the career, one should join the military for a good life, for adventure, for, enjoying. It's a way of life. But if you join only to become the chief, then I think you are sadly mistaken. When I joined, I had no idea that I'll become the chief. In fact, I was like this. I still remember when we were cadets and under training, someone was giving a lecture and said, one of you sitting there will become a chief in the future. You're all fast asleep. Nobody was even listening. So it is just, to clarify what he had said. Unlike the civil services or the bureaucracy, etc., a 2-star rank, which is generally equated somehow with the joint secretary at the center and above, the total people who make it, in that bracket is 0.8%, not even 1%. That means it's that remote a chance of really reaching very high levels. But it offers a very good life. It offers job satisfaction and all those intangibles I told you, in terms of what you change as a person. That's something which you cannot get anywhere else.
I don't want to stand between the crowd and you anymore. Maybe there are some questions from the crowd. There are many hands going up. Will somebody
Yes,
get
sir,
a
please.
microphone around, please?
I just attended one of the sessions at 10 o'clock, BRICS and the Post-Western World Order, and the speakers were Chandran Nair and Shashi Tharoor. So Mr. Chandran Nair was in favor of the Chinese people. Unless provoked, they won't do any harm to the Indians. That's what he suggested. So in the defense, being a defense chief, I'm very much sure about the Indian Army giving a good tucker in our north and northeastern borders. What about the Indian Navy, sir? How do they feel threatened? Do they feel threatened with the Chinese? If I compare with, if I mention the string of pearls, we are a bit worried about all those people. They're building up ports in various regions in Indian Ocean and covering us. So as a citizen, I would like to know how much is a threat the Chinese are giving to Indian Navy and how much equipped our Indian Navy are to give a tucker in our oceans.
See, I take your question. I briefly touched upon the string of pearls strategy by the Chinese that we say. They do have a presence in various, more than 17 ports in the Indian Ocean region. They have a presence in the sense they have participated either in building the port or, they've contributed in some way or the other. They now have a base in Djibouti, okay, where they have stationed some ships, some troops, they have got some ammunition, all those things they have kept there. When you look at the Chinese Navy per se, in numbers, it's a very large Navy. But numbers alone is not the, what matters. Our capability development plans and, force structuring, etc., as I said, it is not based on any adversary. It is based upon our interest. What are our interests? Where does our interest in the maritime domain lie? How do we look after them? And our charter is to protect, preserve, promote, pursue. Okay? So to do that, what are the assets that we require? What type of assets do we need? So now we are looking at also apart from the conventional domain, we are also looking at the drones, unmanned systems, autonomous systems, modern technology, hypersonics, whole lot of them. Yes, China is also doing that, but this is a it's something in which you have to keep keep pace or try to be one step ahead. You may ask, okay, we don't have the best in the world or whatever, but then I will only give you the answer that the Spartan father gave to his son who complained that his sword is a little short. So he told him, add a step to it. That means you take one more step, improve your strategy or tactics that you want, and benefit from it. So our biggest advantage is we are the resident naval power in this region, and geography, favors us. So we have to see how to exploit that and gain the advantage. So we are not unduly bothered. We do have adequate funding support, and the nation is aware of the national leadership is aware of the need for the maritime, for ensuring maritime security and ensuring that the oceans are free, open, and peaceful and inclusive, and ensure that it is rules based. See, what is happening in South China Sea is that China has used the rules based order for its rise. Okay, it has used it to ensure that it gained with the trade and all that. Now, once that it has reached a certain level, now it is talking of the 9-dash line. It's saying that it does not recognize the UNCLOS, where it talks of artificial islands not forming part of any claims. They have developed many of these islands, which are contested. Ideally, it should be arbitrated or discussed, and you must negotiate and come to an agreement. But when the arbitration went against China, then they didn't honor it. So we have also had arbitration with Bangladesh, and we lost, and we accepted the verdict. So that's how we settled the maritime border on the eastern seafront.
Yes.
Sir,
Yes.
sir. So my question is regarding the project Sagarmala. So would you be kind enough to provide some insights on the flagship project Sagarmala regarding maritime security and infrastructure from a perspective of a Navyman?
The project basically aims at ensuring that all the infrastructure comes up in terms of trade, to support the trade and our import export, etc., which I told you. It is linked with connectivity with the road, rail, and so on. And at the same time, it's impossible to physically open and check each container, etc. So there are some things like the PSI, then Container Security Initiative, and so on. So all the infrastructure, the security systems, all that is required, forms part of this. So the progress has been fairly good, and but at the same time, we must remember that many of the foreign ports are also advancing substantially. In China, there is a port, I'm forgetting the name, but which is completely autonomous. There is no human being there. It's all, and when that happens, the turnaround time for a ship is in a few hours. So we have a long way to go in terms of that. But I think we are moving in that direction. Many of our new ports, like probably Vizhinjam, will be one of the new ports which will match up to such standards. So much work is happening in that direction. As far as the security systems are concerned, we have got the coastal radar chains which are being put in place in various phases. And the aim, and we have the Marine Police forming the inner layer, then the Coast Guard, then the Navy. So we are trying to ensure that the security is given the requisite thrust and attention.
I actually since you mentioned the South China Sea issues, considering a significant portion of our trade passes through the South China Sea, I wanted to ask what would be the alternate, view, or how would you change up the maritime operations as well as naval strategies if China was to become hardcore in the South China Sea?
We do have a lot of trade which passes through the South China Sea, especially with Japan, Korea, even with China and so on. So we are interested in ensuring that it is free, open, peaceful, and rules-based. And that has been our approach. And we do have our ships, transiting these waters regularly. And our interest is in ensuring that it remains safe and free. So this is part of our of the naval force structuring and capability development to ensure that we have adequate resources to ensure that it is that our interests are protected.
Admiral, thank you very much for your excellent talk. My question is, you mentioned choke points in various parts of the world, the Malacca Straits, Suez Canal. We are seeing renewed attempts to control the Panama Canal now, or the threats being made to take over Panama Canal by the new president of USA. Do you see some of that reflecting in the Suez Canal, a repeat of the 1956 Suez crisis, inspired by what's happening in Panama? And if it happens, do we have a contingency plan for it?
Sir, we've seen this, the Suez Canal disruption happen, as I said, when one of the ships ran aground. We saw the impact it had on the trade and thing. The Suez Canal is actually operated by Egypt, and it gives them substantial revenue. So I don't see anything like that, akin to the Panama Canal, because Panama Canal is, the US is talking of the Panama Canal, but Panama Canal is operated by Panama itself. Of course, there was a lot of support from the US to, make it. But I don't see, if there's a conflict and the channel the Suez Canal gets closed, it will have a very severe impact in our trade, because straight away it will add at least anything between 10 to 15 days in the transit time. That will add to the time, it will add to the cost, it will add to the insurance and so on. So, which we saw it happen, in fact, when although they didn't disturb the Suez Canal, when the Houthis started attacking ships close to Bab el-Mandab, the shipping companies immediately started rerouting. They started coming from around the Cape of Good Hope, and that automatically, increased the freight charges and so on. So this is the response. It's straight. So they go wherever it is safe, wherever it is economical and so on. So it will happen like that. But our job is to basically, ensure that in our area of interest, we ensure that the seas are safe. So this is one of the reasons why we took aggressive action to curb piracy, when it resurfaced. And I must say that, Indian Navy is feared, by the pirates, because we mean business and we will not tolerate, their activities.
Yes, we have one more question.
Yes, sir.
So I have two small questions. One is a couple of days back
Please
we read
restrict
in
it
the
to one
paper.
question.
Yeah, we read in the paper about autonomous shipping, Navy using it. What are the advantages, disadvantages? The technology is very expensive. Is it justified? Point two is a corollary, since you were talking about the piracy in Somalia. The maritime history says that piracy in Somalia is due to the fact that the fishermen there were not protected, and somebody else from other countries employed high-tech vessels and took away them. These people attacked them, held them to ransom, got much more money than if they were fishing.
Yes.
And they took to this. So it's a kind of social inevitability. Question is Navy doing something to help the coastal community during the peacetime?
No, I'll address that part first. You're absolutely right. You know, I have lived in Somalia for 6 months, in Mogadishu. In 1993. It went into civil war in 1986-87, and we had gone there as part of the UN force. I went on board the ship and I was staying ashore. You know, it just shows how a country can just disintegrate. It had one of the finest militaries, and Mogadishu was a very safe city where women could walk at night, midnight on the streets. Absolutely safe place. Once this, civil war started, the entire military melted, and they all walked away with either a tank or a, artillery gun or their own, and took it away. I mean, just imagine what chaos can happen. So it has become a completely lawless place, and because there's no governance on land, there is no real productivity happening. Obviously, it's a fertile ground for illegal activities like piracy and so on, because they get revenue from it. It is not in the charter of the Navy to go and help them. I mean, that is, I think, a larger social issue which needs to be addressed elsewhere. But we do engage with our own coastal community. The Indian coastal community, we engage with them basically making them aware of the need for security, awareness, etc. Coastal security aspects and things like that. But I want to tell you also that they say that Indian waters is the only place where the fish die of old age. There's a saying. That's why you find all these Taiwanese and Chinese trawlers coming here to fish. But I must say that the fish consumption, the per capita fish consumption in India has really gone up. It used to be around 4 kgs per person. Now it is reached somewhere around 13.5 kgs. But we are way behind the global average of 20 kgs, per capita. And some of the highest consumption is countries like Iceland and Maldives, where it is about as high as 86, 87 kgs. So you see the scope that exists, and considerable thrust has been given in the current budget to seafoods and fishing and so on. So that's that's something that will.
I think that's a great knowledge, and special thanks as a fish lover to you for ensuring that my fish is safe and it will keep coming. Admiral Harikumar, it has been such an honor to talk to you, and thank you very much, audience. You have been such an engaging audience also. Thank you very much.